Hello everyone, I'm Francesca.
And I'm Siti. So, welcome to our first ever Trees Engineering podcast.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about climate change and we're going to talk about some environmental concerns and so touch a little bit on the oil and gas industry. And I'm so glad we've got an expert here to help us to talk about all these things. Yes, we are here with Dina today. So Dina is a climate change planning expert with 10 years of experience and thank you so much for joining us today, Dina.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I think I'm glad to be here, and I'm really happy to share my insights in this topic.
And it's great for us to have you with us. So, just to get us started, let's just jump into the first questions. So, to open our discussion today, like one question that we like to put up forth is about what's the difference between climate change, climate and weather. So, climate is often like mistaken for weather by people, although they are like closely related, but they're not exactly the same thing, right? So, they refer to different things. So, as a climate change planning expert, can you elaborate more on this and tell us what's the difference between the weather and climate in an easy way to be understood by our listeners?
Okay. Yeah, I think in many occasions, this word is actually used interchangeably. I think
Mm-hmm.
in normal context, it is still accepted. But when we are discussing about climate in terms of this science aspect of it, and especially climate change, uh, the words are not interchangeable. So whether it's like if we are looking at a short-term situation, like for example today and tomorrow, probably in the next 1 week, then we use the word weather.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mhm.
so that is something more to like at the moment.
I
Whereas
see.
climate is if we are looking at the weather and the changes over a longer period of time, and we are talking
I
about
see.
a year, 5 years, and all, then we use the term climate. So I think in normal case, people tend to use it interchangeably.
Yeah.
But yeah, in terms
Yeah.
of what the science part of it, it is actually used differently.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the main difference would be between either it's long term or short term, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it seems that climate change is more predictable than the weather, isn't it?
I think both when it comes to I think this is comes to turbulence assessment.
Mm.
So even if we go
Mm.
back into the science uh, of how the fluid movement, so this comes under turbulence analysis, which the equations are not so accurate as well. So always predicting the climate has always been a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
So even like if today, I think in many areas, weather is not so predictable. Climate,
Yeah.
on the other hand, at least because we are looking at a long period of time,
Yeah.
we can actually measure the high level how it changes.
Um,
Not going to be really accurate, but around the
mm.
certain area.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So that sounds pretty clear to me. I think the audience will get it. So how about you, Francesca?
Yeah, I agree, City. So, yeah, we all know that weather and climate are two different things. So, hopefully, people again won't confuse the two things anymore. Yeah, thank you, Dina, for that.
Okay. Alright, so moving on, now that we talked about this before, actually, in our interview article last week that we
Mm.
released on the Trees Engineering LinkedIn page. So, to the audience, if you haven't read it, be sure just to head over to our page and give us a read. So, in the article, we talk about if there is a sustainable way to capitalize on oil and gas. And Dina, you mentioned SDG, Sustainable Development Goals, yeah?
Hmm.
All right. So we have SDG number 13, which is climate action. So is that actually being taken seriously here by the energy industry in general? Like, do we even have policies that are being implemented?
So maybe let's look at it from the as what you mentioned from the energy industry point
Mm-hmm.
of view.
Mm.
I think initially when SDG was announced, even during the Millennial Development Plan, there was a lot of discussions on climate and managing, and SDG just strengthened the actions that's needed in managing the climate. And energy industry has actually taken note and on how globally that there is a need, and especially an immediate need in managing the climate. So we can see that there is a shift that is happening. The large organizations have started taking it seriously.
Mm-hmm.
The stakeholders For example, I think we can see there are some oil and gas companies like Shell and Exxon.
Mhm.
They have been put under tremendous pressure by the, they are actually bringing these companies to the court. Some The stakeholders are actually coming and putting in more pressure to actually embrace the energy transition along with the climate actions SDG.
Mhm.
So these are the things that are happening. When it comes to policies, I think globally many nations have actually started announcing net zeros.
Yeah.
There's some policies coming in on actually making sure that there are some disclosures happening in terms of the performance of the companies when it comes to climate action. For example, their emission
Mm-hmm.
reductions that's happening, and how much are they investing in terms of energy
Mhm.
transition, what is the role of the management. So these kind of policies have already started coming in, and
Yeah.
I think we can just see it accelerating even further in the next few years.
Okay, yeah, this is actually related to the other thing we talked about on the interview. So we mentioned if there is any sense of urgency at all for the Asian market to mitigate climate change. To which you answered like we have actions, but it's still a frustrating sight, or it's still
Mhm.
a bleak reality to say. So there's a lot more that we can do, like decarbonization, carbon capture system. They are all very exciting or optimistic terms that we use. It's very hopeful. But what can actually be done in the Asian market to actually ramp up the industry's response to climate change?
Yeah, I think when we had a chat earlier, we
Mm-hmm.
discussed on why Asian market is not accelerating as fast as the European market or the
Mhm.
developed countries and all. And yeah, I mentioned that priority is
Okay.
different. So the Asian countries, especially the developing countries, their priority is to actually improve the current generation's um, quality of life.
Mhm.
So, for example, the basic economic need, managing the current poverty issues, health issues, and all. So, those are actually coming at the immediate priority.
Mm.
Whereas the developed country, where much of these issues have been addressed, so they are able to look forward, in the next 30 years, 40 years on,
I
and
see.
putting a bit more focus in that area.
Yeah,
So
that
that
makes
is what,
sense.
yeah. And also, I think when it comes to climate action, let's
Mhm.
go into how IPCC and the discussions that be happening in the COPs. There has been an agreement, so the developing countries, they have mentioned that, okay, we will support this climate action, but we need help from the developed countries.
Yeah.
So there is
Mhm.
an agreement that these developed countries will actually do technology transfer to actually
Mhm.
help the developing countries to leapfrog from um, no energy to renewable energy rather than going through the coal and gas burners. So that is one. Another thing is there's supposed to also be some financial support from the developing
Okay.
countries. So unless and recently we have seen that these promises have not really been kept by the developing countries. So I
Yeah, I
think
was gonna ask
I
you
think
about
I
that.
think
Yeah.
there is a role to play from both the sides. Hence, it's not really motivating the developing countries.
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah. So I think that's I think there's a lot of things that I think there's a lot of opportunities in the
Mhm.
Asian side as well. But yeah, as I mentioned, there needs to be a political and economic will in
Mm-hmm.
the Asian
To help
countries,
us out.
and
Yeah.
only by addressing that we will be able to
Correct.
do some acceleration in that area.
Okay.
Okay, so sorry, Dina. So based on your opinion after like seeing the Asian market all this year, what do you think are the key things or points that actually could attract Asian market to pay more attention and do more action to? respond to climate change? I mean, to be in par with the Western market.
um, at the end of the day, everything does boil down to GDP.
Mm-hmm.
And
Oh.
though I personally feel that GDP should not be seen as the mark of how a country is developing,
Develops. Yeah.
but I think
Mm-hmm.
economies tend to still refer to it. So at the end of the day, it goes to economic development. So what has been happening recently is that the big investors, um, the the responsible investors, the large organizations like BlackRock, so they have been saying that, okay, you know what, if you do some climate action, I will be giving you a more attractive bond rate, loan rate, and all. So
Mm-hmm.
by providing this incentive in terms of access to capital at a better rate, at a more attractive rate, is one method that can be used to motivate the developing countries or Asian countries to embrace this climate action. And we can already see these things happening. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
Asian countries have already started announcing net zero to show that their motivation to wanting to do these climate actions.
Okay. Oh, like you mentioned, like they're announcing their commitment to the net zero by 2050. But at the moment, are we investing enough in R&D for decarbonization in Malaysia, or just renewables in general?
Um, I think before R&D comes in, there needs to be the long-term plan. So we
Mm-hmm.
already have the Asian countries, especially
Mm-hmm.
with COP26 that happened, and globally we know that climate action is being taken seriously. So the countries have started giving a long-term commitment. So that is where it starts. You know what? I will say that in the next 30 years, I'm going to do this and I'm going to achieve this. Now that that has been said, we need to granularize the action, what has to be done. So then a medium term plan has to be put in place, a shorter term plan has to be put in place, and then subsequently what are the action needs to be done to achieve it. So I think that is still work in progress in many of these countries on
Mm-hmm.
for example, what is the ratio of renewable energy to
Mm-hmm.
non-renewable energy. So that needs to be put in place. I think certain countries have also announced that they are committing to not build any new coal plants. I
Yeah.
think those are the kind of areas that we can see some action has been done.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the general tone is that there needs to be more done, and hopefully we can see these changes here in coming time.
Okay.
Yeah, because renewable energy, as we know, is a core issues also in the world today. It affects our daily life and it's an important context for many academic subjects. I heard about that. And so, my question here is like, how would renewable energy be taught in the education system, Tina?
Oh, that is actually an interesting question. Um, I think I think in the European countries, I know that there has been a lot of investment in terms of the research, academic research
Mm.
in renewable energy, and we are talking about making sure the batteries are able to have a longer life, they're
Mm-hmm.
able to capture more energy and reduce losses, increasing the efficiency of the wind turbine. So there's a lot of research happening in the European region, and we can see some of the developing countries in the Asian market have also started looking at it. But I feel that it's not as much as happening that in the European countries. So that is number one. So
Mm-hmm.
when we already see that there is a need for this is when the education system. So we know that, okay, we need to develop these technologies, we need to do this R&D. Then usually it'll be backtracked. Okay, you know what? We may need to introduce a certain topics in the. I
Classroom.
mean, at the, let's say, undergraduate level, we need to
Okay.
introduce. Um, a few universities in Malaysia have already started talking about having a module in terms of sustainability and climate
Mm-hmm.
being part of it. So it's already happening at the undergraduate level, albeit in bits and pieces. So yeah, so that is how it's happening here. Not as not as fast how it's happening in the European countries, but we already seeing it happening.
Mm. But do you think that like the current generations or the younger people, do you think that they have a different, like they have a narrow definition of energy? Like if we ask them, they would say like they know, oh, they know oil and gas, they know gasoline, but they wouldn't like say things like batteries or wind turbines or CCS. They wouldn't know like
Mm.
what renewables are. So do you think it's something that people can be taught as young in their early ages, or is it like something that they can learn when they're older only?
Mm, so
Because yeah.
I'm gonna get a bit of I'm gonna refer to. So in
Mm-hmm.
many times we can see the developing countries kind of set the scene, and
Mm-hmm.
you can sorry, developed countries set the scene, and the developing countries, you can see the similar things happening just a few years down the road. So usually you can see that pattern. So one way that the developed countries have actually, the children in the developed countries have already started having a good knowledge on this subject is because of
Mm-hmm.
activism rather than
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, that's true.
political action. So there
Yeah.
was a lot of activism happening at the at the very young and youth level. They've already started talking about it. There's I think the Greta movement is the I think there's even a word, Greta effect,
Mm-hmm.
that has really
Mhm.
motivated a lot of young people to actually come front and even like question the parents, the schools, knowing all the information. So that is how it happened in the developed countries. And if it happens here from the activism side, then we can see it as well. I think when I was back in school, I think energy wise, I think my knowledge was quite limited as well. If we are going
Mm.
to follow the current education system, mainly because we are focusing on preparing the students on how to think rather than the details of how energy is developed, which usually is done in undergraduate days at the engineering level.
Yeah, because I remember you mentioned that our renewables, they are like a small percentage of our energy,
Mm.
and that people, they have to have the awareness to demand a change. So if they're not aware of all of these renewables, all these alternatives, then there isn't like much that we could do, can we?
Yes, correct. I also mentioned that the people have to put in the demand
Yeah.
to the politicians. I
Mhm.
think there's two ways. One side we say that, oh, the politicians are not bringing the change,
Mm-hmm.
but I think the people are the one who's going to voice out, and then the political changes can be seen as well.
Okay.
Okay. Because you say just now that like because the Asian market we have like different priorities. I mean, compared to Western market and all, and then with the Western, and because we're mostly Southeast Asian are developing countries, right? So, what renewable energy that you think would be best fit like for a Southeast Asian country?
Um, I think Asian countries. So Asian countries is a large region. So I think let's focus on the Southeast Asia area,
Mm-hmm.
so that I think different regions have
Mm-hmm.
different opportunities available on the energy transition. So at the Southeast Asia side, I feel
Mm-hmm.
uh, compared to wind turbine, which is the I think the biggest renewable energy source in the European countries and the northern European countries and all. I think you won't be able to see wind turbines here. I think solar. I think the more opportunity for solar is better in the Southeast Asian region. There are
Mm-hmm.
also low speed wind turbine technologies, but
Mm-hmm.
they have not really been scaled yet. So I feel solar is going to play a big role. At the same time, I think certain countries in the Southeast Asian region have a lot of source of the materials that's needed to actually build batteries, large scale batteries, and all. So
Mm-hmm.
batteries could play a role alongside solar in this region, at
Okay.
least in the longer term.
Okay, so solar and batteries, right?
Yep, and
So,
these have to go together because there's a intermittency during the night. There's not going to be solar, so how do you need to be able to fill that gap. So batteries, I feel, will play a role.
mhm. Okay. All right. So, the next questions. Climate change activists has been calling for the energy industry to like completely stop oil exploration, right? So, you've been around the industry for more than a decade. So, based on the years of expertise that you have as an energy expert, like, why has climate change response been slow, in your opinion?
Sorry, I didn't get that. So why has climate change response?
Uh, been slow.
Yeah, because we were warned as early in 1957. Like we had been warned from scientists from reports that say that, oh, if we don't take action now, then things are gonna get
Mm,
bad. So we are at that bad phase where it's gonna get worse. So we haven't really like have a good growth since we've been warned, right?
Yeah. So I think we discussed about this earlier in terms of priorities. I think
Yeah.
people have been
yeah.
pushing for GDP, to develop the countries, to improve the quality of life. So
Mm-hmm.
focus has been there. People have not been thinking about 50 years down the road of like what's the next generation going to be like. I think that kind of importance wasn't put. So
Yeah.
I think that's one of the areas. I think when we are talking about oil and gas, people are saying no more exploration. I think IEA, they mentioned that if we are going to meet 1.5, there shouldn't be any
New explorations.
renewable and
Mm-hmm.
I mean sorry, new exploration on oil and gas. I think that is ideal aspiration. Actually, that's an aspiration, but I personally think that this is not achievable, at least in the shortest period of time, because it's going to take a bit of time for renewable to scale up. Um,
Mhm,
while I think the cost has become competitive to conventional oil and gas, especially given that the current oil price is really high, it is going to take a bit more time for the renewable energy to scale up to displace the oil and gas as the current largest energy producer alongside coal.
Mm-hmm.
So that is number one that's happening. At the same time, I think from COP26, the focus has mainly been on coal. So they said, let's get rid of the worst of them, which is coal. So once coal has been removed, then we can see that, okay, you know what, now next we need to remove the oil, then subsequently the gas from uh, the source of the energy. But I don't see it happening in the next decade, actually.
Yeah. So then for the Asian market, it's that they have too many problems to work on, like rather than focus on climate change. But for the Western countries, the argument has always been that renewables are expensive or they're not as cheap as fossil fuel. But then again, a study by Michael Grubb, sorry, he actually mentioned that costs would decrease as employment increases. So do you think that statement or argument is valid?
Yeah, I think scalability is always the issue. So if you are able to scale it, then the cost reduces. So I think that is conventional economics and how they feel things happen. I don't see same thing happening to nuclear.
Mm,
Nuclear, people expect the price to reduce, but the price has kept on going up because there is more concern in terms of safety. So every new nuclear plant has become more expensive because they have to improve in terms of safety. So I think nuclear is a very unique case that we have to take out.
mm,
I know, let's not discuss about that. But yes, I think if we are going to do a lot more of a wind turbine installation and all, we can see the cost reducing rapidly. Batteries, especially, the cost has reduced significantly, actually faster than what the market has predicted probably about 5 years ago. So that is a
Mm.
good indication that we have seen in the market. That is in terms of battery, and even hydrogen.
Mm-hmm.
We initially, brown hydrogen was the cheapest. I mean, blue hydrogen and green hydrogen, we expected green hydrogen not going to be competitive in the shortest period. But there are some assessments that have shown that by the year 2040, green hydrogen will be actually as cost competitive as the brown hydrogen and as the brown hydrogen actually. So I think they are better than the blue hydrogen at that time. So things are happening. Scalability will actually reduce the price. So hopefully it can be accelerated rather than it's going to take another 1 or 2 decades.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So now that
Yeah.
we're actually reaching the end of our podcast, actually.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. So, thank you, Dina, for your insights on climate change. So, just a recap for what we talk about. You explain what is climate versus weather. We talk about SDG goals, specifically number 13, which was climate action, and we talk about how the Asian market is coping with the energy transitions, our policies, and how we can actually educate people better. Because the thing now is that I see is that we call it like climate science, but there's actually been more climate silence from people because we don't talk about climate change enough. Like if I even Google, it will be a lot more on bad news or as compared to like it will feel like I'm doom scrolling everything.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah,
we have a lot of inputs today. Thanks to you, I learned a lot of new things. I'm sure Francesca feels the same way, right?
yeah. I think
Yes,
Yeah.
I actually learned so
yeah. I
many
think
things. Yeah.
I think probably I just want to end um, with one thing that I would like to share here.
Yeah.
There is a concept of thinking called systems thinking, as in we should not take a certain problem by itself and try to solve it, because there will always be some unintended consequences that are happening.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, let's say we accelerate renewable, let's say we're going to make all our vehicles, the public transport, to renewable energy and all. That will be reflected in cost, and we can see some unintended consequences into the people who are poor accessing a certain economic area for them to get some jobs and all. So these are unintended consequences. So when we are developing policies on, or when we are actually trying to address climate change, we need to step back, think in terms of systems. Okay, if I do one changes in the area of climate, how will it impact the other areas? So I think SDG is all about finding the balance, and
Mm-hmm.
need to, by trying to get improve the SDG 13 more, we shouldn't be affecting the other SDGs to actually get worse. So there needs to be a balance that has to be found, and for that you need to take a systems thought. You need to talk with different stakeholders and understand how these changes are actually affecting each other.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So yeah, basically, it's so great to be able to talk about this with you, especially with an expert, and I'm really glad that we get to share this on our channel.
Yep. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
So Siti, Francesca, and Dina here are signing off. Hopefully, our discussions would be useful for all of our listeners today, and please do look forward to our next podcast, which we will update on our LinkedIn page. So till then, take care, everyone, and stay safe.
Stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.